Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Starting Small. Today, I'm joined by Tim of Airtasker. Tim, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Cameron.
Yeah, so to kick things off, I'd like to start out with your upbringing. Where did you grow up, and what would you say your childhood was like?
Right, so I was born in Sydney, Australia, in a small leafy suburb called St Ives Chase. And I would say that this is one of the quietest places in the world. Also, a very safe neighborhood, lots of families and things like that. And so, really fortunate to be brought up in a place like that, on the North Shore of Sydney.
Mhm.
But probably one of the things is that it's so quiet. I was always looking for some action. I was
Mm,
always kind of like, oh, this is a small place. I wonder what's out there, and how can I go and do more?
mm. So, I mean, always looking for action. What type of action was that? What were your interests? Athletics or sports or anything else?
Well, it's funny because being um, I'm now just past my 40th birthday, so I'm
Oh, happy
now
birthday.
thank you. But growing up in the 90s was like pre-internet, pre-connectivity, and all that kind of thing, and so there's just a lot of time spent in the backyard looking for things to go and do.
Mm,
Which, by the way, I think is a really good thing to be bored
yeah.
sometimes, and so go and find things to do. We talk a little bit about sometimes, the first time that I made money was, my dad would pay me money to pluck grey hairs out of his head. And he used to pay me like, a couple of cents to pluck grey hairs out of his head, sorry. And I remember one day he actually upped the price from about 2 cents per hair to about 10 cents per hair. So I
Wow.
managed to negotiate that price. And then he fell asleep watching TV. And so I sat there plucking these hairs out of his head, and I pulled 250 hairs out of his head and
Wow.
earned myself $25. And, I think at the time I might have been like 8 or 9 years old. And I can tell you, 8 or 9 years old, on an inflation adjusted basis, $25 back then was like big
Yeah.
cash. And so that was, I guess, my first exit, or I guess
Wow.
you could call it all like revenue. So I was always looking for things to go and do, and yeah, it came in various shapes and forms.
I love it. So, just out of curiosity, what did you aspire to do? What did your parents do at the time, and did that have any impact on kind of your trajectory as well?
My parents had really steady jobs, actually. My dad was an accountant, and he did help out on a lot of small businesses, like within our family and friendship circle. But predominantly, had a pretty steady job in accounting, and had a professional trade.
Mm-hmm.
And my mum was a secretary. So pretty safe and reliable job. So not necessarily
Yeah.
as entrepreneurial as I, or the journey that I've gone on. So yeah, I guess interestingly, I think sometimes the stability and the safety and all those things are actually, ironically or unintuitively, what can drive entrepreneurialism, because you've kind of got that safety net, and that's why I feel like so fortunate to have had that middle class upbringing.
Mm,
But that's probably what gives you the privilege, I guess, to be able to go
yeah,
and start stuff.
for sure. For your job wise, maybe before college, did you have some? What was that first job looking like? I know you started plucking hairs as a young kid, but what did that move into before college? What did you get into?
Well, I guess like another thing that my parents kind of pushed on me was to go out and get a job very young. So
Mm,
in Australia, it's 14 years and 9 months is sort of the minimum age that you can go work at McDonald's, or
mm,
work in fast food or something like that. And so as soon as that age came around, my parents pushed me to go and get a job. And I remember that my uncle actually owned a hot dog store
mm,
um, in Darling Harbour, which is like in the Sydney, in Sydney City. And I wanted to go work with my uncle because I was like, oh, that'll be pretty cushy. You can
yeah.
rock up, and my uncle will be there. And my parents didn't let me. They were like, no, go out and get a proper job. So I interviewed at a lot of places, and I ended up working in the movie theaters.
Mm,
Um, and it's quite a funny little ecosystem, the movie theater,
Yeah.
because there was this real hierarchy of the different job types, and I think the best job you could sort of get was in the box office, sitting in the box
Mm.
office, just issuing the tickets. And
Yeah.
then one down from that was like being an usher. So, with the torch, taking someone to their seat. And the
Yep.
lowest ranked job was the candy bar attendee. And
Mm.
so started out as the candy bar guy, and the lowest job even within the candy bar was the popcorn hot bar cleaner. The person who had to basically dig into the buttery, oily
Yeah.
vat and clean that out every couple of hours. So yeah, started out doing that, and it was quite formative because
Mm.
I think it's pretty normal for a teenager to be awkward, and you don't really want to have to deal with people, and you just want to
Mm.
be cool and hang out with your friends.
Yeah.
And so getting a job at that age does, I think, force you to do some things that
Mm.
you're uncomfortable with.
For sure. So eventually I saw you went on to study at UNSW. What did you go to study there? And then what led you to go there?
University or college in Australia is a little bit
Yep.
different, I think, to the US. We have much more like specific degrees. So rather than studying arts or science, you go straight into like a pretty specific degree. And I went into a Bachelor of Commerce, which is essentially Bachelor of Business,
Hmm.
but specializing in marketing, tourism, and hospitality management. So I'd done okay, like pretty well in my high school certificate, which is equivalent of SATs,
Uh-huh.
and I had a choice of a bunch of things to go and do, and so the thing that I chose was I thought like working in hotels was cool, and so I
Mm.
was like, oh, doing a degree in hospitality would be awesome.
Mm.
So that's what I chose to do. And effectively, it was a business degree, but
Yeah.
with some extra courses around things like wine tasting and how
Mm.
to do like silver service hosting and things like that. So yeah, it was a
Yeah,
fun time in university, and business degrees, pretty useful across the board.
for sure. So post graduation, what did that kind of career path look like? I know you get deep into entrepreneurship a few years in, but what was that first job right out of school?
So I came out, and during university, I was working in a hotel because I'd done this hospitality course, and
Yep.
it was about, I used to work these like 12-hour shifts. I don't think it was legal. Like we didn't call it out to
Yeah.
get a 19-year-old working 12 hours shifts, but I remember there was a job on the college jobs notice board that said, you can go and work with Greg Norman, who's a famous Australian golfer, and
Mm.
Steve Waugh, who's the captain of the Australian cricket team. So, like, these are big
Wow.
sort of Australian sporting icons. And, we're doing business with them. So I went and applied for this internship. And what it turned out to be is there's an Australian investment bank called Macquarie Bank, which
Mm.
is, now sort of scaled across the world, but I guess Australia's version of Goldman Sachs.
Yep.
And they were doing all of these really cool projects where they were like, building golf course estates with Greg Norman, and they were building like
Mm.
cricket communities with Steve Waugh. And so I went and applied for that internship. And so after uni, that turned into a full-time job. Um,
Mm.
and so basically, I spent about 5 years in investment banking. And, it was a great experience actually, because it really taught you how to do really hard stuff and to do it, at a really high level of
Mm.
excellence. And
Yeah.
I think, in startups, you're obviously moving faster, and, you need to be like working on speed and agility and all these things. But I think it's also important to know how to do things at a high level of standards, no
Yeah.
typos. Get that PowerPoint presentation or, that Google Slides, whatever, make it
Yeah.
sharp, make it look professional. Get your financial modeling basics and all those kinds
Mm.
of things. They were certainly helpful for me.
Incredible. So it's actually ironic. My last guest I had just a few days ago, he's actually from Sydney too. Went into
Mhm.
professional rugby, but then he relocated to the States to then found his company. And it's a question I would like to ask, especially like post graduation, is why stay in Australia and the location that you were born in as well? And no, why grow business in Australia and why do business in Australia? I'd love to hear.
So I think there are pros and cons of, being in a small country like Australia and a larger country like the US.
Yep.
So maybe starting with the cons of being in Australia. The biggest the biggest downside is probably the capital markets are much shallower than they are in the US market. So
Mm,
it is hard to raise around, or certainly back in when we were starting, 10 or 12 years ago,
mm,
there wasn't really, there's no Sequoia, there's no Andreessen Horowitz, there's none of this
yeah.
sort of like venture capital community. So
Yeah.
scrapping together $200,000 is very, very, very hard. So
Mm,
that's a hard thing. The size of the market's also limited. 25 million people in Australia.
mhm,
It's not a huge market. It's about 1/15 or
yeah.
6% the size of the US market. Um, and then I think on top of that, it's hard to find the skills at the same level of experience that's in the US market. So, if you're
Mm,
building some sort of like, digital platform or whatever that is, finding
mm,
engineers harder at that level of company. Flip
yeah.
that around the other way. What's good about Australia? Um, Turns out that although it's a small population, it's actually only a few cities where everybody lives. So
Mm,
Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and Perth have like probably 90% of the population. And
mm,
so, you're actually, our business at Airtasker is effectively local network effects. And so that
yeah.
actually works out quite well that you've just got to, win these four cities and you win the majority thing. Whereas I think in the US there'd be hundreds of cities that are more
Yeah.
than, a million people. Um, Capital markets. Turns out, that con of shallow capital markets can actually be good in many ways because you get scrappy. You work out how to make every dollar count in
Yeah.
your business. You don't just raise a seed round of 50 mil or something
Yeah.
like that. And then in terms of talent, I think that although there's less people, if you can convince the best people to come and work for your business, you still
Mm,
got an incredible talent pool. Um,
yeah.
so yeah, that was interesting for us. I think in retrospect, it was a really good thing to start in Australia because we were able to build a profitable business
Yeah.
much earlier on. And so, we generate cash now as a business. And
Mm,
that's a really good thing because as we scale in the US, we're generating cash in Australia and we can invest that into the US market.
yeah. Yeah. I think that's a perfect segue for the listeners to understand that Airtaskers started in Australia. I mean, massive milestones that you achieved, and then we'll get into going to the US here in a second. But Tank Stream Labs, I know, is that right before Airtasker? We can dive into that local market as well.
Sure. So this is a really interesting story about sort of organic businesses versus like network effect businesses and stuff. So
Yeah.
we had the idea to start Airtasker back in 2011, and we launched in 2012. It is the hardest business to kind of build from scratch because it's a genuine two-sided marketplace, and I would say more so a two-sided marketplace than even say Uber.
Mm,
Like Uber is two-sided, but it's kind of like you get the supply and then you sell to the demand. You
yeah.
get the drivers and then you find the riders. Airtasker is like legitimately like I guess a two-sided network, kind of like a nightclub, where it's like
Mm,
you need to get a whole bunch of people together at scale really quickly, and then let it all play out. And it
yeah.
doesn't work unless there's a certain critical mass. It doesn't work at all unless there's a certain critical mass. So
Yeah.
we were studying at Airtasker, and we were really fortunate because one of the people that we'd raised money from owned a building in
Mm,
the Sydney CBD, and he had a whole floor of empty space because he
mm,
just bought this building and it was completely empty. So he said, "Oh, I'm investing in you guys. You guys need a few desks. Why don't you just go sit in the corner of one of the levels in my building, and you can just
mm,
sit there and pay me a few $100 a month, and
mhm.
that'll be fine." And at the time, this is like kind of pre WeWork or anything like that. This is like, well, WeWork was probably going, but very, very small. This is back in
Yeah.
2011, 12. And so we would have meetings with all like these startup people, and they'd be like, "Oh, that's so cool! Like, how have you got this like great Sydney office
Mm,
without signing up to a 5-year lease?" And so we'd say, "Oh yeah, we know the owner. Come and sit with us."
yeah.
And literally and completely organically, which is the opposite of Airtasker, completely
Mm,
organically, we ended up filling a floor in the building full of startup entrepreneurs who all
Wow.
wanted to pay for a desk month to month, and that became a co-working business. And now we
Mm,
sort of compete with WeWork and things like that in
very
Sydney.
cool.
Only difference is we've actually built it as a profitable business, so it's actually
Wow.
a good little business. Uh, and we've put in place a CEO, and that CEO Brad's doing an incredible job. So it was a
Wow.
really good story of organic businesses
Yeah,
versus like the extreme opposite is a network effect business where you've almost got to like go in deep and hope that you can come out the other end.
for sure. I mean, so building that with Airtasker, um, what was the scaling plan behind Tankstream Labs at that point? Did you stay in that building, or is there other buildings across Sydney? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So we scaled across that floor, the whole floor that we're sitting on, which was something like a couple of hundred people
Mhm.
in a few months. And so we're
Wow.
like, oh, sweet, we should do another floor. And so we started expanding the building, and I think
Mm,
we sort of peaked at about 4 floors in that building, all being startup co-working space. We then did a number of partnerships, and we've rolled out about 8 or 9 sort of spaces across Australia.
wow.
And incredibly, it's all been built on sort of profitable economics and just reinvesting the cash that we make back into the business. So
Mm,
we haven't had to like capitalize the business. We haven't had to like raise money for it. And again, I think that is one of the things that comes from not having any money.
yeah,
You sort of work out how to build things, on a more scrappy and organic basis.
for sure. So around the same time, let's get into Airtasker. What is kind of the inspiration behind Airtasker? So it's local services, providing services for like home, residential, or even commercial. But what was that inspiration and realization from you?
Yeah, so it's so maybe to start with like what Airtasker is and like our differentiation. So
Yeah.
we're building a marketplace for local services, and the two things that I think make us unique is that we're open and we're infinitely horizontal. So when we say like an open community marketplace, what we're saying there is like we don't have manual operations where we sort of tell taskers, hey, you do this or you do that, or this is how much you should charge, or this is the price, or anything like that. It's
Yeah.
purely a platform, and it's a system basically of what we call refer to as like transparency and accountability.
Mm,
So it's transparency. You can always see who you're working with before you work with them. There's no, commitments to do that. You're always making your own choices in that marketplace. And
yep.
it's accountability. So all the payments go through Airtasker. And what
Mm,
that means is that, and they're all escrowed in a secure escrow from when you book a job to when the job is actually done.
I see.
What that means is that there's a full transactional loop there. And that's
Mm,
really important because if the person that you got to do your job doesn't do a good job, we
mm,
want to know about that and we want to tell the next customer this
yeah.
person got a 1-star rating. You want to be wary of that before you book them again. Yeah, not to
Yeah.
say that they're a bad person or anything like that, but factually, that's how that happened. That's just
For sure.
transparency.
Mhm.
Um, and then we also want to be able to say, this person's awesome. You
Mm,
should be able to build your brand and become the best at what you do, and to be able to do that. So
mm,
because of that, we have really high gross margins. We don't have like operational staff in all of the cities and all that. It's just a platform essentially.
mm,
So open community is one part that makes us unique. The second thing that makes us unique is that we're infinitely horizontal. And what we mean by that is because we don't define how people use the platform, it's literally whatever customers want to ask for is what you can
mm.
ask for within our guidelines. So there's certain things we don't
Yeah.
allow, but um, if you need someone to come to your kid's birthday party as a clown, but by the way, you have to be able to speak Japanese. You also have to be able to speak Hebrew
Mm,
because we're trying to teach the kids Hebrew. Um,
yeah.
you can find that person on Airtasker because you can ask for anything. Another example might be, an example that comes up, which is like completely ludicrous, is like, I flew my drone into a tree. I can't get it down. Can somebody help me get it down?
Mm,
And so I guess the insight into what makes Airtask unique is that like it turns out that most jobs don't fit neatly into a little category.
yeah.
Like if you just I need someone to move some boxes for me, or like I need someone to like take these things out of my garage and get rid of them. those are all things that can happen on Airtasker, and that's what makes us unique.
Mhm.
Um,
Love it.
so the way that we kind of got to this was I was moving apartments back in 2011. And I asked a friend to help me move. And he has a small business that he uses where he makes frozen chicken nuggets. And so
Mm,
basically, we put everything in the back of his truck, and he helped me move apartments. And this just got us thinking, like, why do we ask friends and family to do these kinds of jobs
mm,
when, there's tons of people out there who actually want to earn some money? Like, why do we do that? And what
yeah.
we realized is it's really hard to like trust people in your
Mm,
local community. And so that's where we started out in terms of building the business. It was to um, create a place where you could, be able to form trust with people in your
mm.
local community, and that enables a lot of commerce to happen, which is which is an exciting thesis.
Yeah, if you can reflect on maybe that first year of rollout, what was that like? Kind of bringing together both supply demand of those asking for tasks, those able to do those tasks, building that first audience. What did that look like in that first year?
The first 3 years
Yeah,
were extremely dark and difficult, like extremely dark and difficult.
yeah,
One of my observations on like startup folks is like the ebbs and flows of like your energy.
yeah.
And, I'd say like a really high point in your energy cycle would be like before you start a business, you're at the pub with some friends and you're like, hey, we should go and build this business. And it was like, yeah, that's the best idea ever. And then, it sort of like usually goes a bit negative as you sort of like work it out and you kind of think about it and you're like, oh, that sounds really hard. But then
Mm,
if you do decide to go ahead, there's like this massive adrenaline rush of like building a platform, building a website, whatever it is, and launching it.
mm,
But one of the things I kind of observed is that like 90 days in, that adrenaline wears off.
yeah,
And you start to think like reality kicks in and it's terrifying. Like it was
mm,
terrifying for us because I remember just sitting there with a couple of friends going, wow, like in order for us to not be like losing a truckload of money, because we'd hired people to build this platform. We're spending some money on marketing to get it going. And I think we had a burn rate of like 100 grand a month in
wow.
one of our months early on. And that wasn't our burn rate. It was, we were spending less than that, but all of these bills had sort of landed in this one month and it was
Mhm.
terrifying. And I remember looking down and going, wow, we have to do like 100,000 tasks, a year for this thing to have a remote chance of breaking even and
Yeah,
not losing tons of money. And so that was really, really difficult. One of the things I think is also difficult about a genuine sort of two-sided open marketplace
mhm,
is there isn't really like a linear set of steps
mm,
to make the business good. Like I think if you start like, a fish and chip shop or, a restaurant,
mm,
there's somewhat of a trodden set of steps, like, design menu,
yeah.
procure foods, hire good chef, get restaurant, start making food, sell to customers. Whereas
For
two-sided
sure.
marketplace, where we don't define the jobs, was like,
Yep.
do we start with like supply or demand? What do
Mm,
we like literally what do we do? And,
yeah.
and so it was very haphazard for about 3 years of just trying everything and
Mm,
quite literally nothing working. Or like,
yeah.
1 out of 20 things would work. And so it's very, very really, really hard business actually.
Mm. What would you say? We kept stressing on that 3 year mark. What would you say was that turning point for Airtasker? If you can recall, maybe like that big push.
Well, I guess first of all, it's really interesting when you look at things in retrospect. It can feel like it was a definitive day or point in time, and it probably
Yeah,
wasn't. It was probably a bit more like, oh, we actually, it was more like the balances of things maybe changing a little bit. So I think it
for
was
sure.
like, ebbs and flows, but generally going up in some sort of direction.
Hmm.
And it's probably about 3 or 4 years in that probably the number of things that worked was 51% instead of 49%.
Yeah.
One of the things I can remember that we did that was pretty powerful is that we raised a round of funding from one of the big television networks in Australia,
Mm, hmm.
and they actually gave us, as part of their investment, a huge amount of like advertising space,
Mm,
basically, like sort of media for equity.
yeah.
And we made a television, like we spent about $1 million because we were flush at that time. Spent
Yeah.
about $1 million making a cool television commercial called Like a Boss, and put it on TV. And it was actually, a pretty big moment of pride. And it kind of felt like we'd made it. We hadn't actually made it because we were still like burning tons of cash.
Yeah.
But that was probably one milestone where I was like, oh wow, like we've actually made something here.
Mm. I would love to get into that more because I know that is part of your model is that media for equity. What role? I mean, what did that first example play? Rolling that out in Australia for, I would say, international expansion as well. What role does that media for equity play for the growth?
Yeah, so we've got a pretty scalable model now around partnering with local media firms to scale our business. But I think there's a couple of lessons to be learned here.
Hmm.
One was like most strategies don't come from like thinking, and like, just sitting there and just thinking and, coming up with a plan and doing it. It's mostly just an iteration. 9 out of 10 things don't work. One of them works. And then you
Yeah.
sort of connect the dots in retrospect and be like, oh yeah, I guess like that's really strategic. And it looks
Yeah.
like it's strategic, but it was more accidental. And media for equity for us was definitely accidental. We
Mm,
basically couldn't raise money from anyone else. And so we're like,
mm,
oh, let's take this money from this media firm. But then they were like, you have to take this advertising too. So we're like, okay, cool, we'll take it.
yeah.
And then we used it, and then we're like, oh my God, that was like that totally worked. That was the thing.
Mm,
And so that was, that was a pretty big lesson for us that strategy doesn't comes from just doing. Like you've
yeah.
got to be out there and learning and doing. Very, very intuitive. So basically, what happened to us in Australia is when we put this advertisement on TV, we were like doing about 1 million in revenue, and over about 5 years, we more than 20x that
Wow.
through this marketing. Um, and then we actually listed the business on the Australian Stock Exchange, the equivalent
Mm,
to Nasdaq or whatever in Australia,
yeah.
and we were able to pay out about a 5x multiple back to that investor
Mm,
from in that short period of time. And so like it just really worked for the media company, it worked for Airtasker, it worked for all of our shareholders, etc. And
mm,
so what we've worked out is that as we go into each new country, we basically create a new company. We have a local media partner come in and
mm.
take equity in that company in exchange for media capital, i.e. advertising.
Yep.
And that's how we scale our business. And we've done that in the UK, we've done that in Australia, and recently we've done that in partnership with iHeartMedia and
Wow.
Televisa Univision to sort of scale in the US market.
It's incredible. What does that look like going internationally for the team? What does that team look like for Airtasker? Are they in-house that are in these other countries? What does that look like?
One of the interesting things about our model is that it's really, really scalable
Mm,
because we're not like heavy on local operations. It really is. It's I guess a way of thinking in a community.
yeah.
That's what the platform is. Like it's a way of thinking about how you should do services and then building a community around that.
Hmm.
Um, and so we've got really, really high leverage, which means that, we've got a team of about 170 people in our head office.
Hmm.
But as we go into each new market, we have very, very lean and small teams. So, for example, in the UK, we have 2 people on the ground in London, scaling all across the UK, going to Birmingham and then Manchester and building and building and building.
Mm,
But we're able to do that really scalably. In the US, we have a team of 3 in Los Angeles, and predominantly focused on marketing, growth, PR, local community building.
yep.
But it is a really, really lean team, and again, I think maybe one of the advantages of being constrained money wise is,
Yeah.
there's a very high bar for hiring someone.
Mm,
And we are very much like, especially coming out of this last couple of years, which have been really, really hard and
mm,
difficult, is
yeah.
we are only going to hire the absolute best people, and we're only going to hire them once their manager has done their job and worked out what needs to happen, then we're going to hire someone to do that job.
Yeah, love it. Looking into, I know this is kind of a topic that you've covered in the past before, but polyworking and kind of how trends are leaning towards the workforce. And I would love to hear what you're seeing, especially from Airtasker, and how many people are working multiple jobs and what that looks like today.
Yeah, so we have like, tens of thousands of weekly active taskers on our platform in the various cities in which we operate. And I would say, you know, one of the trends was clearly this idea that you could break down work from rather than being binary, like
Mm.
full-time permanent work or nothing,
Yeah,
it's more a sliding scale. Everyone wants flexibility. Everyone wants the ability to be able to earn some extra money when they need it, but also to be able to do their thing when they want to do their thing. So
mm.
flexibility is clearly, a trend that's just going to keep going in that direction. Very few
Yeah,
people want to lock into that. Same thing with businesses, by the way. Businesses are getting smaller down to like one person, starting an
mm.
e-commerce business. You don't
Yeah,
want to go and hire 5 people. You need someone this week to run a flash sale. You don't need them the week after that. It's crazy to
Y-
be like you can only hire permanent full
yeah,
time. So I think flexibility on both sides is definitely a trend, and we are really supporting that trend.
mm.
Another one that I think is interesting is AI, and one of the things that we think about a lot is like how is AI going to affect our business? So you know um, it's touching every kind of business that's out there. But like there was like recently a South Park episode which I think summed this up, rather hilariously, which is like, if you are doing like knowledge work, like marketing, graphic design, legal work, even being the CEO,
Yeah,
that's probably more likely to become almost automated by AI than, the joke they make in the South Park episode is fixing the oven door. Like it's actually
yeah,
really hard to fix an oven door. Like it requires incredible dexterity. It requires unique skills and
yeah.
tools to be able to do that. And so one of the things that I think is that really embodies Airtasker is that we believe that humans are always going to be at the frontier of the next thing that needs to be done,
Yeah.
and even more so in the physical and local world in which we're in. And so,
Mm.
although I do think that AI is going to take a bunch of the jobs that exist today, one, I don't think those are necessarily the physical and local jobs of
Yeah.
Airtasker. But two, I'm not afraid. I'm quite excited about the future in the sense that as jobs, get easier, humans are always going to want to do the next thing. Like, I don't think
Yeah.
anyone's sitting around going, "Oh, the job that, I don't have from last year. Well, I guess I'll just sit here and do nothing." It's like, no,
Yeah.
you're probably going to push people to get more entrepreneurial. And, I don't think that that's easy. Like, I think it'll
Yeah.
be quite hard and painful for a lot of people. But
Yep.
in the bigger picture of humanity, it's probably not a bad thing that there's just constant, relentless change
Mm.
and pushing forward. I think as a
Mm.
group, we probably get stronger together.
Yeah. As we slowly wrap up here, I would love to hear from your point of view on how do you manage like the quality control of those who are performing tasks, and what does that look like? I know stars and reviews are a huge asset and a huge part of that, but what does that look like managing the quality?
Sure. So I guess if you think about like Airtasker's model, it's kind of similar to a dating platform or a social network, which is that it's really about providing the user with the tools to
Mm.
be able to make good decisions for themselves based on data.
Yeah.
We think that this is really important at Airtasker because, particularly in services, the eye is, the definition of quality is in the eye of the holder, right? Like
Yeah.
it's like, that there'll be in the same way that when you hire someone as a marketer into your company, there's
Mm.
a variation of different people with different skills and attributes, and what is not good for some people will actually be great for another person. And so
Yeah.
we don't think that a network that says this person is bad and this person is good could ever
Mm.
scale, because it's almost
Yeah.
like it's going to be different. And although some things seem like they're standardized, like cleaning, what
Mm.
we discovered is they're not standardized because there's different homes, there's
Yeah.
different locations, and then there's different expectations from the customer. Some
For sure.
customers would be like, hey, if you clean my home, you have to fold my clothes. Like, I just expect you to, do the laundry and fold my clothes. Other people
Yeah.
would be like, no, 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 I just need you to like dust down the surfaces and then like, make it fast and go.
Yeah.
And so trying to standardize that doesn't really make sense. And so
Mm,
Airtask is all about like direct transparency, data, and information. And then
yeah.
telling the customer, please make good choices, use the
Yeah.
data, ask questions before you book this person.
Mm,
That's ultimately how we manage quality in the marketplace. And
yeah.
and I think ultimately quality is not one thing, it's data.
Mm,
Like
yeah.
nobody is terrible at everything.
Yeah.
Everybody has unique skills that they're good at and things that they're not good at.
Yeah.
Um, one thing that I think also underlies this, Airtasker enables you to pull in a lot of like factual data to about, for example, we do police checks, background checks, licenses, all of those things. You can ask for
Mm,
them on our platform, and our taskers can display them on their profile, and those things are verified by us. But those
very
are
cool.
like objective standards. Like
Yeah.
this person has passed a background check. That's just a fact. We're
Yeah.
not saying that they're well behaved. We're just saying that according to these stats,
Yeah.
they have passed a background check. Another thing that we do is we have an escrow payment system whereby when you book the tasker, you
Mm,
store the money with Airtasker. It doesn't go to the other side. It
I
stays with
see.
us until you're happy that the job's done.
Got it.
And
Yep.
and that really is a powerful mechanism because it means that the taskers can't really, there's no benefit to them of telling you they can do a job and they're not doing it because why
Exactly.
would you do that?
Yeah.
So that's sort of the underlying system that we've built.
Yeah. Love it. Well, Tim, I like to conclude each episode with this. If you can share one piece of advice with an aspiring entrepreneur, maybe something you've learned or regret along the way, what would you say that would be?
I think the most powerful thing that I've been given advice on is to learn how to be learn how to live with the discomfort of not knowing stuff. So
Mm,
it's really uncomfortable for most people that have ambiguity. Like, what's going to happen tomorrow? I don't know. Are we
yeah.
going to have enough money? Geez, I hope so.
Yeah.
Is our business going to scale? It would be great if it did. That ambiguity is really hard. I think humans are designed to not have that ambiguity. But
Mm,
I think, starting a business or going on any journey sort of requires you to be able to do that. So I think learning how to be comfortable being
mm,
uncomfortable would be my piece of advice.
incredible. Well, Tim, thank you so much for taking the time. And to the listeners out there, make sure to check out Airtasker at airtasker.com.